All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another exciting episode of our weekly Bible study. So glad that you're able to join today. Thank you so much for taking time to study the Bible together with me. I'm always excited. I wish we could do it online as we used to, but the way things are, at least we're able to do this together. So I'm so glad that we're able to spend this time studying the Bible together. I appreciate your continued prayers. I'm still a little gravelly, but I'm definitely on the mend from all the things that I've been through with this COVID and post COVID syndrome. I am glad to be improving and glad to be home doing it. So I do appreciate your continued prayers. Glad that you're able to join today. Let's jump right in together. We are continuing our study through Daniel. We're in Daniel chapter 6 today. We'll be looking at verses 10 through 24. And in this chapter, we're going to see trust exhibited in a very extreme way. Trust exhibited. Now, one of the benefits of walking with God for many years is that we get to see firsthand how the Bible is right about everything, literally everything. The Bible's right about money, true contentment, sex and marriage, leadership, relationships, and so much more. Believers who live by God's principles see them validated in their lives over and over again. The world and the devil want to tell you you're missing out on something by following God's way. You're missing out on true life, on true happiness by following God's word. Do what feels good. Do what feels right. But little does it know that it may bring you happiness for a season, but there is a payday someday, and sin carries a bigger price than we're ever willing to pay. God's way is the true way of joy. It's the true way of peace and contentment, and He's given us that blueprint in His Word. The prophet Daniel, as we've been studying through this prophetic book, we've seen that Daniel served under at least three kings. He first served under King Nebuchadnezzar. Second, he served under King Belshazzar. And during that time of service with Belshazzar, that was when the time when he interpreted the handwriting on the wall for him. He also had two significant visions during Belshazzar's reign. And third, Daniel 6 records that Daniel also served King Darius, the first king of the Persian Empire. So, based on the datable events in the book of Daniel, we can calculate that Daniel was probably close to about 80 years old during the events that we're going to study today here in Daniel 6. So during this time, Daniel appointed, or King Darius had appointed 120 officials that he called satraps to administer his kingdom. He also chose three administrators, including Daniel, to oversee all of those satraps. Daniel distinguished himself in service so well that King Darius even considered appointing him over the entire kingdom. Now, the king's favor toward Daniel did not please the other officials. They were filled with jealousy. They were filled with envy. But they could find no charge to bring against Daniel because of his trustworthiness. Shouldn't that be the thing that everybody says about Christian employees? Shouldn't all employers say, I want to hire those Christians because they have integrity and they're trustworthy and they're hard workers, and I can put them in charge of anything in my business and not have to worry about it at all? That should be our reputation among unbelievers and among all those in the world. And Daniel had that kind of reputation, but instead of them celebrating it and saying, oh, that's wonderful, they were instead filled with envy and filled with jealousy because that's where they wanted to be. They wanted to be in Daniel's place. They wanted him out of the way as they clawed their way up the corporate ladder in the Persian government. So finally, they decided they might be able to trap him in some way relating to his relationship with God. They knew he was a man of integrity and he would stick to his routine and he would stick to his praise and worship of God. And remember, in the kingdom of the Babylonians and the kingdom of the Persians, there were multiple gods. So most of the time, they didn't care what god you worship because there were gods everywhere. But what they suggested to the king is that he established a decree that for 30 days, anyone who petitioned or prayed to any god or person other than King Darius himself would face death in a den of lions. Now, no doubt this played to King Darius's own building himself up, and it played against his own self-image and wanting to be considered a god and wanting to be worshipped. And he no doubt bought into that, no doubt. So he signed this edict, and according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, any law so decreed could never be changed. Well, Daniel learned about this edict, but even though he knew it was the law of the land, he continued to pray to God 3 times a day, just as he'd done before. Daniel's accusers found him doing so and informed King Darius that Daniel had disobeyed the king's edict. The king was displeased when he heard this, but he was unable to determine a way to rescue Daniel. So at the king's order, Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. Now the king could not sleep that night, and he hurried to the lion's den at dawn and cried out, hoping to hear Daniel's voice. Daniel replied that God's angel had shut the lions' mouths, and the overjoyed king ordered Daniel's removal from the den, to which Daniel was found unharmed. Then the king ordered retribution against those who had charged Daniel. We'll see about that, where they all perished. Then Darius sent word throughout the kingdom that people should honor Daniel's God, who was able to do incredible wonders, including saving Daniel from the lions. After his deliverance, Daniel continued serving in the Persian court. Well, let's look at it. Let's look at this whole account from the beginning. Let's look at Daniel chapter 6. We'll start reading with verses 10 through 14. Let's look at verse 10 first of all. Here we see in this section, the trap is set. The trap is set. Verse 10. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying. They went as a group because they knew exactly what they were going to find. Daniel being faithful. Can I get a witness right there? They knew they were going to find him being faithful. They found Daniel praying and asking God for help. Now, this phrase we see when it opens up here, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, this indicates he was not present when the other officials persuaded the king to enact the edict. He knew that according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, the edict could not be changed. So as a consequence, he no doubt assumed that death awaited him if others discovered his practice of regular prayer. Can you imagine that? What if you knew that death awaited you if someone caught you reading the Bible or praying? There are Christians all over the world today, missionaries all over the world today, who face that very real danger. If they catch you reading the Bible, if they catch you praying to God, if they catch you singing a gospel or a praise and worship song, you could face death. Daniel knew that, but he did not let that threat and that danger keep him from being faithful to serving God. See, Daniel went home not to hide, but Daniel went home because he already determined what he was going to do. He would remain faithful to God and his worship and his practice with God regardless of the personal cost. So we see here that the windows in Daniel's upstairs room were open toward Jerusalem. Perhaps Daniel's practice of praying toward Jerusalem was a reflection of what Solomon had done years earlier in 1 Kings 8, verses 44 through 49, praying toward Jerusalem. Today, many Jewish people continue that practice. They face Jerusalem when they pray. In fact, ancient synagogues of the Jewish people in Israel are normally oriented toward Jerusalem, and many of them even carry that practice today. So praying in this manner provided a visible expression of Daniel's desire that one day God's people would return home to Jerusalem to establish a new life there. Daniel's custom was to go before the Lord and pray 3 times a day. Further, he gave visible expression to his prayers when he got down on his knees as he prayed. There was no doubt, because of the posture and because of what he was doing, that he was praying to God. There was no doubt. Praying on his knees signifies a posture of humility. Daniel was showing his place before God. He knew his place before God, and he was humbling himself by getting down on his knees, and anyone who saw him knew that he was praying. When you pray in public, can people tell what you're doing? Or do you do it real quickly under your breath so nobody can tell? Daniel did it so everybody could see. Daniel, first of all, the Bible says, he tells us, he gave thanks to his God. He gave thanks to him even knowing he could lose his life right here, right now. He felt a deep gratitude to God for the leading and guiding that God had done in his life. All up to this point in his approximately 80 years, God had done so many things for Daniel. So he started out, thank you for all the things. He started out with God. The text here also reveals that Daniel's prayer posture and his routine was just as he had done before the edict was enacted. If a law of the land caused you to have to change some form of worship or some form of your service to God, would you be true to that law, or would you stand up against it? Daniel refused to allow the king's decree to alter his practice of worship and communion with God. Then the words "these men" here refer to Daniel's accusers. They went as a group to ensure they would have many witnesses to bring charges against Daniel. And they knew exactly what they would find, and exactly what they did find. They found Daniel praying and asking for God for help just excuse me, we'll get through it, amen. They found Daniel praying and asking God for help just as they knew they would. Well, verse 4 tells us that Daniel's accusers were seeking to find fault with him. Instead, they found him seeking his God. Daniel was aware of the law, but he did not use prayer as some kind of protest against the Persian custom or culture. Rather, he simply maintained his spiritual discipline as he already practiced it. Well, let's look at what verse 12 tells us. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den? Tricky little guys, weren't they? The king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. See, Daniel's accusers, they went straight to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Although they already knew what it said, they wanted to have the king verify it by his own mouth before they applied it to Daniel's situation. The accusers were very clear. Did you not publish a decree? That's the first part of the question. Then they spelled out the terms, that it would last 30 days and impact anyone who prays to any god or human being except King Darius. Finally, they verified from the king that the guilty party would be thrown into the lion's den. They laid it all out. The king's reply was no doubt better than Daniel's accusers could have anticipated. The king verified that the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. Persian law was unchangeable once the king had enacted a verdict, and once he had brought it into an edict and it became law. The Persians believed, that such a policy would ensure that a king or a leader did not play favorites or apply the law in an arbitrary manner. The same situation appears to have happened in the book of Esther, where the king could not violate his decree to exterminate the Jews, but he did, on the flip side, allow Esther and Mordecai to propose a successful counter decree. Daniel's accusers replied to the king, and the king had no way out. He tried to figure it out. He identified the guilty party as Daniel, one of the exiles from Judah. They testified before the king, the whole group, that Daniel had disregarded both the king and the law. They further affirmed that they had witnessed Daniel praying 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He recognized the folly of his own pride in enacting such a decree. He had carelessly trapped one of his most trusted officials and now had to deliver him to certain death. The Bible tells us here that he was determined to rescue Daniel. As the king, he had many resources at his disposal. But regardless of all his resources, he could find no solution to deliver. Although Darius, the Bible says, made every effort until sundown to save him, he was unable to devise a strategy that might result in Daniel's freedom. This is a great reminder to us that as Christians, we must worship God even when others try to limit our worship. We live in a country today where persecution for our faith is subtle at best and becoming even more hostile as the days go by. But the Bible is clear that our absolute allegiance must belong to the Lord. He must have first place in our lives above all else. We need to ask God for the grace to stand faithfully for Him if we face a significant challenge to our faith. Well, let's go on to the next section, Daniel 6, 15 through 18. Here we see the door is shut. The door is shut. Verse 15. The men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, "Remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. In verse 18, then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. Notice how throughout Daniel 6, the accusers acted as if their concern was for the king's honor. But their intent from the very beginning was to trap Daniel and get him out of their way as they were trying to claw their way up the ladder of success in the Persian Empire. The officials reminded the king of his edict that constituted a law of the Medes and Persians. The king would have been well aware of that fact, but they went on and added the redundant detail: no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. They had trapped the king with his own decree to get rid of one of his most trusted advisors, Daniel. By this point, King Darius no doubt perceived the malicious intent of these officials. Nevertheless, he knew his decree was irrevocable. So the king gave the order he did not want to give. He did not want to condemn to death his most trusted official, but Persian protocol gave him no choice. So they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den, threw him in, an action that certainly in their mind would bring Daniel certain death. Before the soldiers threw Daniel into the den, however, the king said to him, "May your God who you serve continually rescue you." The king's words here indicate that Darius thought he was sending Daniel to his certain death. But as a polytheistic society, he also recognized that there might even be some slim chance of hope that Daniel's God might in some way be able to rescue him. But no doubt he thought he was sending Daniel to his certain death. Then a stone was brought in, placed over the mouth of the den to seal it, preventing any possibility at all of Daniel escaping. Not only that, but they went a step further. The king sealed it with his signet ring. That means that anyone who saw it would know that it was official business of the royal court. And then the signet rings of all his nobles would also indicate their agreement with the king's decision. So with the king and many of his officials approving his action, it was clear there was no way that Daniel's situation might be changed. Now, it's also interesting to note at this point that the Lord Jesus' opponents also wanted to ensure the sealing of his tomb after he was buried. We see that in Matthew 27, verse 66. Both the action against Daniel and the action against Jesus were endorsed by the ruling government. And anyone who witnessed either one of those two events would have thought the matter was concluded with the death of Daniel or the death of Jesus. But of course, no one foresaw God's dramatic intervention in both of these cases. Well, we see then the king returned to his palace. He spent the night without eating. No doubt he refused to eat because he thought his most trusted advisor, his friend, had died. Have you ever been so upset you just couldn't eat anything? You were so grieved and so stressed out that you just didn't feel like eating anything. He didn't want to eat. He didn't want to be entertained, and he couldn't sleep. The king was in a tremendously stressful situation. The stress that he was under was tremendous. The book of Esther tells us a similar kind of a thing where King Ahasuerus could not sleep one night. He ordered royal annals to be brought to him so he could read them. Well, Darius didn't even want that. He wanted no distractions, for nothing could console him. This is a great reminder to us that God is always with us, even when circumstances suggest that he is not. Jesus' death on the cross provides the ultimate example of this truth. Jesus was fulfilling God's plan perfectly, but he seemed to be alone and to be rejected. The night before he went to his cross, he assured his followers they would face persecution in this world, but he told them they should not fear because he had overcome the world. It's a great reminder that we can read in John 16 and verse 33. Well, we know in Daniel that's not the end of the story. The stone was in. He had been thrown in the lion's den to face no doubt certain death. But because God writes it, that's not the end of the story. We see in Daniel 6, 19 through 24, the tables are turned. The tables are turned. Let's start looking at verse 19. I love it. Check it out. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I done any wrong before you, your majesty. The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. Now, catch that. No wound was found on him. Remember, they threw him into the lion's den. No doubt being thrown into a lion's den would leave some sort of a bruise or a broken bone or something, but there was no mark on Daniel at all, because God was seeing him through from start to finish. Well, in verse 18, at the first light of dawn, the king got up. He couldn't sleep anyway, no doubt. As soon as the first light of dawn, he was out there. He wanted to see what was going on. He hurried to the lion's den, certain he would discover, but somehow hoping for a miracle. Could Daniel's God have overcome the king's foolishness and his own selfish pride? As the king came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice. This expression translated here, an anguished voice, this emphasized the king's despair of the night and the day before, of the great stress he had been under. He had no reasonable expectation whatsoever that Daniel was still alive. In fact, the words translated to Daniel could also be rendered for Daniel. That is, in other words, the king may have already been lamenting his decision to throw his most trusted official to the lions. We do not know that his referring to his servant as Daniel, servant of the living God, implies any kind of faith on the king's part. But he had come to recognize that Daniel's loyalty and devotion to his God was something different than anyone else around him. May it be the same thing said about us, that our devotion and loyalty to God is different from anyone else that may be around us. Perhaps he thought that if anyone could deliver Daniel, it was Daniel's God. So the king's question, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lion? It implies exactly this, namely that King Darius recognized that Daniel was faithful to his God. But God was Daniel's God, not the God of King Darius. He must have no doubt been shocked to hear Daniel's voice coming from the den. Daniel spoke with the king, beginning with the words of normal Persian protocol. May the king live forever. That was their typical greeting to the majesty. Earlier in his palace ministry, Daniel was quick to shift the attention from himself to the Lord. He credited the Lord with revealing and interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter 2. He also stressed God's role as he interpreted the handwriting on the wall for King Belshazzar in chapter 5. Now he did so again in chapter 6. My God sent his angel and shut the mouths of the lions. Daniel then stated the reason God protected him from the lions. I was found innocent in his sight. God determined to protect his servant from wrongful death, and did so to glorify himself. Earlier in this chapter, Daniel's accusers sought to find fault with him, but verse 22 provides the verdict that matters above all else. God found Daniel innocent. That is, he found him faithful. He found him true in spite of the circumstances. Daniel's words, nor have I done anything wrong before you, your majesty, assured the king that Daniel had continued to be faithful to the Persian king he served. His accusers had not been able to find fault with him, and Daniel assured the king that God also had vindicated his cause. Well, the king was overjoyed to hear Daniel's voice and to realize that Daniel's God had overcome the situation in spite of the king's foolishness. He gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. On the one hand, someone might have argued that since the law could not be changed, Daniel should remain in the den. But on the other hand, Daniel surviving the night in the den of the lions provided sufficient evidence he did not belong there. And if you looked at the letter of the law, it supplied the letter of the law. He was thrown into the den of lions. He was not consumed. He was brought out, just as Darius had instructed. And amazingly, no wound was found on him. It reminds us when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in chapter 3 emerged from the fiery furnace unharmed, there was no effect on them and not even the smell of smoke on them. Neither did the lion's den and him being thrown into it have any effect whatsoever on Daniel. The text affirms the reason for his deliverance because he had trusted in his God. His three friends had chosen to trust God as well, even at the risk of their own death, as we remember from our study of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in Daniel 3. Years later, God demonstrated his ability and his power to save Daniel, another of his faithful servants. Hebrews chapter 11, verses 35 through 40, reminds us that God does not deliver every believer from harm or death. We know that. Throughout history, God has chosen to rescue people dramatically, as he did with Daniel, his three friends, and many others. But others have glorified God through their martyrdom, giving their lives for him. Even the Apostle Paul suffered greatly as he walked with God. 2 Corinthians 11, verses 23 through 33 records many of the things that Paul suffered and ultimately martyrdom. We have the assurance that God always provides grace for his people regardless of the earthly outcome. God vindicates faithful believers one way or another for his honor. Well, now let's see the conclusion of the story as the tables are turned in verse 24. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. The king gave the command to execute those who had falsely accused Daniel. He considered them untrustworthy, since they had plotted to get rid of their enemy, someone who Darius trusted and admired. Also, the king had just witnessed an amazing feat of divine intervention. Daniel's God had saved him from a den of lions. It might have made sense to Darius, consequently, then, to put to death Daniel's enemies, lest he possibly anger Daniel's God by retaining them as officials. So the king ordered that they be thrown in the lion's den. The judgment also included Daniel's accusers, along with their wives and children. Perhaps some of them had willingly participated in the deceit. Or perhaps Darius wanted to ensure that future generations of family members would not try to retaliate, which was a common custom of kings during this time, or this may have been the law or custom of the Persians of the day. Regardless of the situation, as it is so many times in life, the family suffered catastrophe because of the selfish, sinful decision of a single loved one. How many times have we seen that, known of that, or even experienced that ourselves in our lives? The family suffered catastrophe because of the selfish and sinful decision of a single loved one. Ultimately, Daniel's accusers thought they were getting rid of him, But God intervened, and what they planned as Daniel's demise became their own. This account of the trust Daniel exhibited in God throughout his stressful experience reminds us as Christians that we can trust God in all circumstances. Others may try to limit our worship or discourage us from taking our faith too seriously. Sometimes we may even face persecution that challenges our faith, that threatens our way of life, and maybe even threatens our life itself. But nevertheless, we can trust that God knows our situation and that He will act in our situation to bring honor to Himself as we remain faithful to Him. Daniel showed commitment, courage, and conviction. But Daniel is not the hero of this story, nor is Daniel the hero of the book of Daniel as a whole. The hero of this story and the hero of the book of Daniel is God Himself, the one who is always there, the one who is always faithful, and the one who is always in control of the outcome, no matter what the circumstance. God was Daniel's hero, and God is my hero, and God can be your hero today if you put your faith and trust in Him in all circumstances of life. And He's a hero who will never fail. Thank you so much for joining today. I pray God will bless this study to your heart as He has to mine. I do encourage you to like the video here and to comment. I always love to see that you're able to join in and to read your comments as well as you gain insights or as you get blessings from the study today. And I do encourage you to tune in to the Bethlehem Baptist Church Facebook group at 11, or you can tune in at bethlehembaptist.com to be able to join in with the worship and the preaching of the word today. And again, that starts at 11. But I do appreciate you joining in today. May God bless you today and the rest of this week. Until next week, keep on keeping on.